Okay. All right. Well, good morning, Dr. Hatcher.
Good morning.
I'd like to welcome you to the first in a series of video conferences that we are taping so that we can provide that to our membership regarding the TEPP journal. Most of you know that the TEPP journal, the Training and Education in Professional Psychology, is a journal that is published by the American Psychological Association along with APIC, the Association of Psychology Postdoctoral and Internship Centers. So welcome, Dr. Hatcher. We are very interested in talking with you today. This is in regards to an article that you had published in the TEPP journal, and it's entitled "The Internship Supply as a Common Pool Resource, a Pathway to Managing the Imbalance Problem."
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your thinking behind the development of that article and some of the ideas that you came into this common pool resource? I know that you had some other organizations that you were looking at, but tell us a little bit about your thinking behind that.
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to. I actually got started on this attending a lecture in the early 90s about what was called a tragedy of the commons, which is a situation that occurs when a depletable resource, like the model is a pasture that's shared by farmers, and more farmers can send their cows to the pasture, and the cost of sending them is distributed amongst all the farmers, and the benefit comes to the individual farmer, with the result ultimately that the pasture is overgrazed and degraded and everybody loses. So that was in the early 90s. And then when I was on the Council of Chairs of Training Councils during the 2000 years, I was part of a lot of discussions about the internship crisis. And it occurred to me that the model of a depletable resource that was discussed in this lecture could apply to the internship imbalance problem. The early ideas that Garrett Hardin published and were talked about in this lecture had to do with ways of managing the problem of depleting a depletable resource. And his ideas were mostly about external government control, thinking that the users couldn't help themselves for their greed, for their individual interests. The interesting thing is, when I went back to the literature after that, after kind of remembering this thing, in that roughly 15, 20 years, a really large literature had grown up about managing depletable resources like fish stocks and forests and water supplies, and it eventually got into managing like parking structures and things like this, which showed that simply taking over, the government taking over this process actually led to all kinds of problems, and that the most effective way of dealing with resource allocation and resource sustainment is to involve the user groups, the people who use the resource, in a deep way in the process. And so that was kind of a framework that I brought thinking-wise to this article. I just should mention that this literature actually got really famous, and the person who was sort of the lead scholar, Elinor Ostrom, won the Nobel Prize in economics in the late 90s for this. So this whole approach is really been heavily supported by research and this sort of thing. So that's how I got started on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the analogy is that there's a finite resource, and in this case, for the profession of psychology, we're talking about accredited internships, and there are a number of doctoral programs that highly value that resource and would like their students to go out and take advantage of that or have access to that resource.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. In fact, really all accredited all accredited graduate programs have as a fairly strong goal, matching their students to APA accredited or at least APPIC registered, or I'm not sure, acknowledged. I'm not sure what the term is exactly.
It's APPIC membership, and there are about 200 programs in APPIC that are not accredited. That leaves about 450 that are accredited.
Yeah, right. I just looked at the figures from 2011, and about 24% of the positions seem to be unaccredited, but recognized by APPIC, right? So I mean, so that's right. The programs want this resource, and they end up sending more students to the match than there are slots. One of the interesting and I think most important things that I got out of reading this literature and thinking about it on managing what are called common pool resources was the need to think about this all in a broad, systemic way. So that really got me going on this, thinking about, well, what is it that makes the internship, the APPIC internship match a scarce and depletable resource? And because the fact is that when you look at figures from programs that are posted on the web, graduate programs, almost everyone gets some kind of internship, though many of them are not through APPIC. And so the other factor in this is that licensing boards set their own rules. They're ultimately the ones who determine who gets to call themselves a psychologist. And they set different rules than APPIC sets and that APA has set for an experience that would qualify for licensure as a psychologist, as an internship experience. So you get this situation where, in fact, almost everybody gets experience they need for licensure, but because programs and, to some extent, the Commission on Accreditation want to limit the internship to either accredited or APPIC certified, that is what ends up creating the internship imbalance as we experience it. So it's a crisis that's the result of, essentially, of the APPIC and APA quality vetting process that limits.
So we kind of have an open range policy here, it seems like, where 20 years ago that wasn't such a big deal because the internships were sort of plentiful. There may have been a 5% or a 10% ratio of students not matching, but today we're up to close to 28, 30% of students that went through the match process did not get matched. So students are anxious, doctoral programs are anxious, and APPIC is anxious about trying to help address this imbalance problem. And we've had a number of committees and work groups that are addressing this, but it just seems to be working as slow as syrup, as they say sometimes.
Well, right, actually, and if you look at the slope of the increase of matched positions and the slope of the increase of students applying, they're diverging at actually an accelerating pace. So the many efforts, well-intentioned and probably useful efforts to address the internship imbalance have basically gained no traction on the problem as of yet. So
and still taking steps backwards almost, because I believe over the last 2 years we've had an additional 500 applicants versus previously, and only about 30 to 50 additional slots.
Right.
There's an increase of slots,
yeah,
but it's not keeping pace with the doc programs.
Right, absolutely, yeah. That's what I mean by the slopes of increase are diverging, so that each year, on average, since 2000, the difference between new slots and number of students applying has been about 55. Though this year, I think it was like 100 and something, and the year before it was 100 and something. So it seems to be accelerating. Yes, that's right. It's a huge problem.
So how would the common pool resource be addressed?
Well, right, yeah. I mean, the challenge on this is basically that the internship match fits the tragedy of the commons picture, where there is no kind of agreement, no governance structure, no way to jointly manage the resource, so that people just keep, more and more people come, and it gets worse and worse. So what the literature points to is the need for some kind of management of the situation. What I got from the Common Pool resource literature is that the optimal way to do this, that combines treating all people involved in a fair and equitable way and achieving optimal outcomes, is for the users to get together to solve the problem as a group. And this is, of course, a big challenge in psychology, where there are different sort of training camps, in a way, that have different kinds of values, and there are many different interests involved. So finding some kind of a forum where the professional training community could get together and work to solve this problem it's been a big challenge. The biggest.
So your proposal is a governance structure where a group of invested entities would put some control on this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the idea. I think I need to contextualize it a little bit, but let me tell you the idea first. The idea that I had and talked about in the article was to work through the Council of Chairs of Training Councils, which is the place where the training councils come together, along with APPIC, and also the Commission on Accreditation is present there too, and find a way to work together to essentially address the problem forthrightly and develop a management structure. In the article, I included the idea that APPIC might set up a requirement that any program sending students to the match would be a member of this governance group and adhere to its policies. The part of the problem is finding something that will pull the group together rather than have individual council interests, my students are better than your students, or this kind of stuff that happens. Have that kind of division rule the day, which is a fairly strong force and hard to overcome. So you need some kind of something that will make people realize it's more valuable to work together than to work apart. And that's been the big challenge in trying to move forward with this.
Well, any closing comments? I know we have a short time here, and before we close, if there's any closing comments, of course, the views that you're expressing are your views and not necessarily those of the training councils.
Much as I wish they were the views of the training councils. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate that, and we look forward to more discussion about this issue.
It's good to talk to you.
Take care.